Testimony Tuesday with Dr. Joseph Meaney. Today on The Simple Truth, we consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the pure, strong, chaste heart of Saint Joseph. I'm your host, Jim Havens, and our guest today is Dr. Joseph Meaney. He received his PhD in bioethics from the Catholic University of the Sacred Heart in Rome. He's past president and senior fellow of the National Catholic Bioethics Center, NCBC, ncbcenter.org, ncbcenter.org. Dr. Joseph Meaney, welcome to The Simple Truth. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Excellent. Great to have you here with us. So we always begin the same on Testimony Tuesday. What was your early life like, your family and the culture that you grew up in?
So I was very blessed. My father was a Thomistic theologian and philosopher who just was a wonderful dad, very, very involved with our intellectual upbringing. We had some very interesting discussions with my sisters around the dinner table. My mom is a medical doctor. She started the first crisis pregnancy center in South Texas, in Corpus Christi, right after Roe v. Wade, was the first Respect Life coordinator for the Diocese of Corpus Christi. And so my earliest memories actually are pro-life activities with my family. And I grew up in a very international way. My mom is a French citizen. And so we would spend our summers with our French family in France. And then we would come back for the school year in the US. So a lot of back and forth and international travel as a kid. But Corpus Christi is a very, very exceptional place. Obviously, the only diocese in the world named after the body of Christ. It was a Spanish explorer who found the bay on the Feast of Corpus Christi, and so that's how it got its name. But it's very blessed with Eucharistic adoration, with a lot of fervor. The population is probably about half Mexican American, overwhelmingly Catholic. And I grew up. I like to joke and say that I didn't know that illegal drugs existed until high school when Mrs. Reagan, Nancy Reagan, said that just say no campaign against drugs, et cetera. And I was like, what are drugs? It was a beautiful kind of sheltered life growing up.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we always try to follow the sacramental graces. And so I would propose, or I would assume that you were baptized as an infant, first Holy Communion in, around second grade or so, confirmation at some point in there. What do you recall from it, specifically, I guess, surrounding First Holy Communion, since you bring up Corpus Christi, the body of our Lord Jesus? Any major memories of the sacraments growing up?
Yeah. So, my baptism was a little bit exceptional because my mom really wanted me to be baptized as soon as possible. And she went to our parish priest and he was like, well, we'll get your son or daughter baptized as quickly as we can, and you can take the course and, within a few weeks, you'll have a baptism. She's like, well, I'd really like to have him baptized the day that he's born. And, the priest was like, well, that doesn't sound very practical. I don't know how I could do that, et cetera. And so mom was like, all right, well, I guess it's not possible. But when I was born, one of my aunts met with the bishop and said, oh, yeah, so, Mrs. Meaney had her little baby, and she's so sad because she really wanted the child to be baptized the day he was born. And the bishop was like, really? I can come right away. And so he came and baptized me in the hospital chapel, which was really lovely, the day I was born. For my first Holy Communion, I was actually scheduled to do it with my class, so first grade class back in Corpus Christi, but I was actually serving as an altar boy, and this was during the summer before I was going back. And I was serving as an altar boy in a mass, and it was kind of a particular mass because it was for the mentally handicapped. And the other server who was with me was, I think, someone with Down syndrome. And when it came time for Holy Communion, he just kind of pushed me forward. And, the priest gave me Holy Communion. So I received Holy Communion not in a scheduled way, but kind of accidentally. And so then I did my first Holy Confession after having received First Holy Communion, which was kind of backwards, but it was an accidental First Holy Communion, but a very lovely one.
Yes, yeah, wonderful. We're talking with Dr. Joseph Meaney. What about confirmation? Any memories from that?
Yeah, I was confirmed sort of the end of the elementary years, beginning of I guess my junior high years, and it was through our parish at St. Patrick's, and I took Patrick as my confirmation name, which was lovely. And we had a very good friend of the family who was a Catholic convert, Ron Sullivan, who was my sponsor. But it was a very beautiful ceremony in our local parish church. And I kind of had a lot of good memories from that. Also because my sponsor decided that he was also my godfather. So I had a godfather from baptism, and also he considered himself my godfather from confirmation.
Great, yes, and so going forward then into the high school years and then college years. So at what point, I guess, did bioethics start to kind of stir up in you?
Yeah, I mean, I was very involved with pro-life. So we started the pro-life club in our high school, and we were very active doing all those things. I ended up going to University of Dallas undergrad, and so very much attracted to the Catholic identity there, to the Rome program that they do. Was very involved also in pro-life work at the University of Dallas. Actually, the Crusaders for Life pro-life club was the largest club on campus when I was there, which was kind of nice. But I had a real blessing, which was Dr. Janet Smith was one of my professors. I took 3 courses with her, and one of the courses that she offered as an elective for upperclassmen was bioethics. And I found bioethics fascinating. The fact that, you could apply Catholic moral principles to cutting edge medical problems, problems with scientific research, and come up with very good answers despite the complexities of the problems. I thought was very, very interesting. So that was really kind of my first academic exposure to bioethics. And then I continued on in graduate school. So I did a master's degree in Latin American studies at the University of Texas at Austin. And there I was kind of involved in kind of the practicalities. I was involved with medical missions to Guatemala, a wonderful Catholic lady who would organize these medical trips, and doctors and nurses, and they would do these free operations in the Western Highlands of Guatemala. And I would go along and help coordinate the missions and help translate. So I grew up bilingual with French and English, but South Texas is very much of a Spanish-speaking part of the United States. So I took Spanish 4 years. Yeah, 4 years in high school. So every year in high school, and had native speakers as my classmates. And so I was challenged to learn Spanish really well already in high school. And then I continued with my Spanish instruction later on. So yeah, it was very interesting all those years having both the theoretical and a practical exposure to bioethics.
Yes, and what was driving you, would you say, during this time, as far as the interest in bioethics, the pro-life interest as well, flowing into the bioethics, the medical missionary aspect of this? Can you explain a little bit about the faith and reason that was behind this resonating with you and then flowing into these endeavors?
Yeah, it was definitely interesting to see how practical, right, and how necessary bioethics was. So what we ran into in Guatemala was a situation where the Ford Foundation, I believe it was, or maybe it was anyway, one of these big anti-life foundations had sponsored a program for children, mothers and children, materno-infantil. And the program essentially called for the surgical sterilization of women that were considered to be having too many children, the indigenous women of Guatemala. And they had a very diabolical sort of plan, which was to train the midwives. Almost all the children there were being born with the assistance of midwives rather than doctors and in the hospital. Train the midwives to use postpartum depression to tell the mothers, look, you don't want to have any more children. You've already had enough, etc. I've got this free operation, etc., that we can offer you. And they were going to use these very basic clinics in the countryside to do tubal ligations. And they were going to pay the midwives money for every woman that they brought in to get surgically sterilized. So they actually showed up at the clinic that we were working with, a Catholic clinic, and said, we'd like to do this program for mothers and children. And we were like, oh, that's great. We'd love to do a program for mothers and children. And they says, well, it has a family planning component. And we said, well, family planning is okay as long as it's natural family planning. And they're like, no, we're mostly interested in your surgical suites because we want to be doing tubal ligations. And we said, well, you have to go somewhere else. And so they did. And unfortunately, that program continued. But I was very, very impressed, right? This is like a village in the western highlands of Guatemala. So it's about as rural and out of the way as you can get. And yet the population controllers were showing up and they were, doing these programs. So I actually got involved in United Nations pro-life work. At that point in the 1990s, there were all these world conferences going on. There was one on population in Cairo, and I ended up going to the one in Istanbul called the Habitat Conference, but we were defending life there, which was wonderful. And it was great to see there was like a global community of pro-lifers very active.
Wow, fascinating. We're going to be right back after the break with Dr. Joseph Meaney. Again, you can find him over at ncbcenter.org. And look at there's a vast need out there. We know this, and that God is raising people up like Dr. Joseph Meaney to go into it and bring the light and do the good. And he's also calling you and me, wherever we're at right now. Think about how the Lord is calling us, wherever it may be, into that need to serve. Maybe it's just with our family, with our spouse and children today, co-workers, whatever it is. Come, Lord Jesus. We're going to be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Dr. Joseph Meaney, on this Testimony Tuesday. He is a Catholic husband and father, also past president and senior fellow of the National Catholics Bioethics Center. You can find it over at ncbcenter.org. We're going to get right back to Dr. Meaney in just a moment. But first, if you are buying or selling a home, there's an easy way to help the Station of the Cross at the same time. Real Estate for Life has 1,400 experienced, morally grounded agents in the U.S. and Canada. Visit realestateforlife.org to find a Christ-centered, experienced realtor near you. And don't forget to mention the Station of the Cross. All right, Dr. Meaney, a lot of great stuff there in that first segment. Getting into the work somewhere, I want to table the work aspect for just a little bit. We are going to dive deep as we can in the second half of the show here into Dr. Meaney's work in bioethics. We'll get into some of the present day difficulties and controversies that exist, and have Dr. Meaney help us to kind of sort through some of that. But I do want to ask about your at what point, I guess, in the story, in your story, did you meet your wife? Can you share with us some of that, your call to marriage and family, and how that unfolded?
Yeah, it was a very exceptional story. So my wife, Marie, was friends of my sister, Mary, at Oxford. So they actually met at the Catholic chaplaincy there. And when it came time to do these UN conferences to do pro-life work, so my sister, Mary, had actually gone to the Beijing Women's Conference and done a lot of pro-life lobbying there. So in 1996, when it was time for the Habitat 2 conference, which is supposed to be a city summit, so nothing to do with life or family necessarily, but all the anti-life forces were pushing abortion at every single UN conference in the 90s, sadly. So the pro-lifers were going, and my sister organized a group that included Marie, and I was included in that group as well. And so there were there were 5 of us that went, and we were, going to go there for 2 weeks and do pro-life lobbying 24 hours a day, almost. Sometimes the sessions that were supposed to end at 5 o'clock continued on until past midnight. So it was almost like you could be there a full 24-hour cycle, certainly towards the end of the conference. But so I met my wife, Marie, in Heathrow Airport on the way to Istanbul. And then we had 2 weeks together. We were actually staying in a convent in Istanbul that had right attached to it a center for the mentally ill. So it was a guest quarters sort of situation, but we could hear a lot of the cries and whatnot of individuals who were mentally disturbed, who were also being cared for there. And so we had quite an adventure. That was a very beautiful time. And then I went back to Oxford and continued seeing Marie and my sister Mary, and then actually came back. So that was in June of 96. I came back in November of 96 to the World Food Summit, which was held by the Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome. And there we had a beautiful audience with St. John Paul II. So all the pro-lifers who were attending the World Food Summit were invited. There were probably like 200 of us. But Marie and I ended up being in the front row and have a picture together with St. John Paul II from that event, which was very beautiful. And we started dating actually after that. But we had a big problem, which is that she was in England and I was in the United States and quite far away. So I took a job with Human Life International. And so I was then in Virginia, which was closer than Texas, but still across the Atlantic. And then HLI actually needed a Rome office. And so I volunteered and opened the Rome office in 1998 for Human Life International. And so then we were on the same continent. We were both in Europe, but she was still in England. And we dated long distance. So we would like fly back and forth. And it was kind of the beginnings of the internet. So we would email and, call each other, et cetera. And we were engaged to be married in 1999 in the Grotto of Lourdes, which was very beautiful. We'd done a pilgrimage to Our Lady of Lourdes in France, and we were right there in the grotto when I popped the question, and she said yes. And then we were married in the year 2000. We were married in France, so half her family is French, half my family is French. So France was the logical spot because my other half of family is in the States, and the other half of her family is in Germany. And so we were married by one of her cousins, who's a priest in France, and that was really lovely. It was really beautiful. But we were almost married on September 11th, which would have been a bad anniversary. But instead, we were married on September 9th, which was great.
Yeah. So, wow, Dr. Joseph Meaney is with us. So you're then off and running as now a married man. A new family begins. We just had a wedding anniversary myself, my wife and I, 17 years just a few days ago, and the way we kind of celebrated it with the family was, this is the birthday of our family. You have a new family that begins on a wedding day with a new marriage, and so tell us about the unfolding then of a life. You still have the work that you're doing, but now as a married man, what happened next?
Yeah, so I was living in Rome at the time. So we moved to Rome. It was actually the Great Jubilee of the year 2000. And a funny story there, actually, for our wedding, is that I was working together with Cardinal Alfonso Lopez Trujillo, who's the president at the time of the Pontifical Council for the Family. And the Jubilee of Families, so the Great Jubilee of the year 2000, in October of that year, the Jubilee of Families included 12 couples that were being married in St. Peter's Square. And Cardinal Lopez Trujillo asked me if I wanted to be married in St. Peter's Square by, future St. John Paul II. And I was like, that sounds wonderful. And then I talked to my wife and she's like, that sounds terrible. I don't want to be married in the middle of a square with hundreds of thousands of people around. And so we ended up not doing that. But I was selected to be a lector at that Mass. And I was also, before that, at the World Youth Days, I was one of the translators for the International Youth Forum. So that was a young man and a young lady from each bishops' conference around the world were selected to be part of this International Youth Forum. And they would bring up the gifts and they would do all kinds of things in like native costume from their different countries at all the different events of the World Youth Days. But because I was translating for them into English, so I was translating from Spanish and French and Italian into English, we, the translators, got to go with them to all the events, and they were like in the front row. And so at the World Youth Days at the year 2000 in Tor Vergata, there's this huge stage, like 1 million people out there. And I was, 10 feet away from St. John Paul II, sitting on the stage with him and all the others from that that International Youth Forum. So it was wonderful. We had a very beautiful Jubilee year in the year 2000. But we moved to Rome after our wedding in September of 2000 and lived there for 2 years. And then I was transferred back because I was made the director of all the international coordination for Human Life International. Before that, I was helping with our Rome office. And their headquarters are in Virginia, in Front Royal, just a little bit west of Washington, D.C. So we moved there in 2002, and we stayed there until 2010. So it was like an 8-year period. And it's a very lovely place. The Shenandoah Valley is very beautiful, and the city of Front Royal, the town there, is full of wonderful Catholics. So, Christendom College is based there. Catholics in the Military is based there. Human Life International, the Population Research Institute, Life Decisions International, Seton Homeschooling, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All these wonderful Catholic apostolates are based there. So it's a little Catholic enclave, and the parish is beautiful. But again, the crazy thing about St. John the Baptist, they have one parish that covers everything there, is that the families would come in and they would take up the entire pew. I mean, the average family at St. John the Baptist had like 6 kids, and there were quite a few families with, 8 children, 10 children, 12 children, et cetera. And my wife and I had no children, and we were suffering from infertility. And it was quite a strong suffering, particularly in that context, right, of a place with so many children. It sort of really emphasized the point that we did not have any.
Dr. Joseph Meaney is with us. And I'd like to return to that in a few minutes. But first, can you connect the dots basically from that point to then working for National Catholic Bioethics Center, so we can, I guess, kind of sort of wrap up the overview of the work up until today?
Sure. So I was then doing the international coordination for HLI all the way until 2010. And then I was sent to Rome to do a doctorate in bioethics at the Catholic University of the Sacred Heart. So that's the Gemelli Teaching Hospital in Rome, where the Holy Father goes for medical treatment, and where St. John Paul II was taken when he was shot, and where Pope Francis was taken when he was sick, etc. And so I did the doctorate there, and it was really because, we had so much bioethics going on in our pro-life world, and in particular with the pro-life seminarians, so Seminarians for Life International, a lot of bioethical questions would come up, and I found them fascinating, and it seemed like there needed to be more study in that area to be able to provide good answers. So HLI very kindly sponsored me to do the doctorate. So I did that from 2010 to 2015 when I was in Rome. And I was basically working and doing the doctorate at the same time, which is not ideal. But at the same time, it was very generous of HLI to continue paying my salary full time when I was only working part time. And when I finished that, then I ended up moving to Paris, and we lived in Paris from 2015 to 2019. And I was doing international coordination for HLI based out of Paris, which was lovely. And my wife and I, it was a family home that we actually stayed with on my wife's side, and she loved it. I loved it. Everything was great. And then I was asked by Dr. John Hawes if I would be interested in being president of the National Catholic Bioethics Center based in Philadelphia, because he was thinking about retirement. And we'd known him for several years when we lived in Rome, and he was good friends with my wife's family, and I got to know him pretty well. And so we really prayed about it, because we were very happy living in France and doing all this great work, et cetera. But it seemed like, that's what God was calling me to do. So I came back to Philadelphia. We moved in June of 2019 to start with the National Catholic Bioethics Center. And so very soon, right afterwards, really 2020, the beginning of 2020 was the COVID pandemic. So we had a huge kind of baptism by fire there, all the bioethics associated with that. And I served as president at the National Catholic Bioethics Center all the way through 2024. So I did a 5-year term. And then I stepped down from that, and we elected Dr. John D. Camillo to be my successor. And I've continued working with the NCBC as a senior fellow since then. So I'm full-time employed with them, but no longer have all the burden of running the organization.
Yes. And can you share a little bit, I guess, just a sort of an overview of some of the topics that you focus on and that you address in your bioethics work there?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the work that we do are end of life questions. I think for Catholics, those tend to be the ones that raise the most questions. Catholics don't really have any doubt about abortion being wrong, and that we should do all that we can to save life in the beginning. But at the end of life, it's a little bit more complicated. Obviously, euthanasia and assisted suicide are excluded. But what does ordinary means? What are extraordinary means? They're strong questions that require discernment.
Yeah, very important questions. We're going to get right back with Dr. Joseph Meaney after the break. Again, if you want to check out more on the National Catholic Bioethics Center, ncbcenter.org. But when we get back, I'm going to ask Dr. Meaney a little bit more on his personal testimony of infertility and also turning to restorative reproductive medicine. So maybe you've heard of that before, or you have some sense of what that means, or maybe not. What does it mean? We're going to get into that when we get back with Dr. Joseph Meaney. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Dr. Joseph Meaney. He is past president and senior fellow of the National Catholic's Bioethics Center, ncbcenter.org. We're going to get right back into it, but first, don't forget about iCatholic Mobile for your mobile phone needs. When you subscribe to iCatholic Mobile, you help fund the Station of the Cross. Check out iCatholic Mobile, iCatholicMobile.com. All right, let's go back, and if you could share more on this personal testimony that you have of infertility. And I will also mention that your wife speaks to this topic very eloquently. She's got a book that's out there that I want to recommend to folks: When Expecting Doesn't Happen, Turning Infertility into a Journey of Hope. We do hope to have your wife Marie on to share more of her side of the story of it all with us, share her book with us at some point, but a little bit more on your perspective. And specifically, I guess I want to ask about what the Catechism says, paragraph 2379, where it says the gospel shows that physical sterility is not an absolute evil. Spouses who still suffer from infertility after exhausting legitimate medical procedures should unite themselves with the Lord's cross, the source of all spiritual fecundity, fruitfulness. They can give expression to their generosity by adopting abandoned children or performing demanding services for others. And this comes right after the paragraph where it talks about a child not being something that is owed to anyone, but is a gift, the supreme gift of marriage. So all of this, it is a great suffering, infertility, even secondary infertility. My wife and I have experienced that, a great suffering in that as well. And so there is a very real suffering with all of this. And obviously with our suffering, we want to unite it to our Lord, all suffering, and offer it with him to the Father by the Holy Spirit. This is who we're called to be and how we're called to live. And at the same time, though, for you and your wife, Marie, you had not exhausted legitimate medical procedures. What was that like as you began to grapple with infertility and discerning what you were called to and how you were to respond to this?
Yes. My wife has a very beautiful testimony of her experience of it. And I have to say, the experience of the husband tends to be very different from the experience of the wife. In most circumstances, I would say the pain of infertility is even stronger for the wife than it is for the husband. I certainly felt the pain of infertility, but it seemed slightly less existential to me than Marie. And I spent a lot of time consoling her and encouraging her. And we worked together very closely, looking for all the different medical options that were out there. One of the saddest things, of course, is that so many people don't know about restorative reproductive medicine. They think that IVF is the only thing available. In fact, many medical professionals think that IVF is the only thing available for couples suffering from infertility, which is false. And But the sad thing is that it is true that restorative reproductive medicine is only practiced by a few. And sometimes you have to go long distances and you have to do a lot of research in order to find the help you need. And until recently, it was also kind of difficult to get it covered by health insurance. I think that's starting to change, which is wonderful. The Restore Act in Arkansas requires all insurance, medical insurance, to cover restorative reproductive medicine procedures, which is great. But it's not the case in all states, and so it was definitely very, very sad. And we had so many people praying for us. It was kind of ironic as well. I was working in pro-life, trying to help babies, preborn babies, to come to life, to be born, and then I wasn't able to have children of my own. We were struggling, and I noticed that among my colleagues, there was actually a very high percentage of these pro-life leaders, pro-life workers, who suffered from infertility, which was kind of very, very sad. So we actually had a priest do a prayer of deliverance over us. So it's like the St. Michael prayer. Prayer against evil influence and the devil, and anoint us with holy oils, and that was very interesting because Therese, our daughter, came 9 months after that anointing, which was really lovely. But we went through quite a few medical procedures. We went to the Paul VI Clinic in Omaha, Nebraska. I went and had a procedure in Philadelphia. We did the Creighton fertility model of fertility awareness based methods to time conjugal relations at the most fertile period in the cycle, and we were so blessed to have our little daughter, who was born 9 years after our marriage, and we were both of us from families, large families, in the sense that Marie was actually an only child, but she had just about 40 or 50 cousins, right? One of her cousins had 9 children. Another cousin had 10. One of my sisters had 6 children, so we were kind of hoping to have a large family. And sadly, we weren't able to have children at first. And then we had the joy of Therese. And then afterwards, we suffered a miscarriage and a little baby that did not survive past the 10th week. And then after that, no more children. So we had that pain of secondary infertility that you mentioned as well.
Yes, yeah, I'm so sorry to hear it, but so beautiful to hear your daughter Therese, and just what an interesting life this is, where we are called to there's going to be suffering for all of us, and we know by God's grace what to do with it, to unite it with our Lord Jesus, to offer it, and then to discern, okay, where does he want us to go from here? This, I would imagine, gives you great insight in being able to help people, not just on the level of logic and reason, using the intellect in terms of, helping people to understand what is ethical, what is not ethical, what might be good and what might not be, but also, to understand very personally the experience, and to be able to speak to that, to help people. So this is an area that is very clear in terms of IVF and its the fact that it is an immoral practice, very clear in the Catholic Church's teaching, and yet it's also an area, because there is such pain to the suffering of infertility, that the intellect might be clouded by many who are going through it, and they just really want a solution to the perception of their pain and suffering, and they think about IVF as really maybe the only solution perhaps they have left. They might think of it that way. What would you say to someone who maybe is in that place, and they're struggling and they want to figure out the way forward, but they're having a hard time doing it? I guess using the head and the heart, what would be your message?
Yeah, it's so important to realize the facts, just the scientific facts. 9 out of 10 embryos that are conceived in a lab for in vitro fertilization are never born. So it's a 90% mortality rate, which is just heartbreaking. And I would say nobody nobody wants to have their children conceived in a laboratory. Everyone wants their children to be conceived in an act of love between the father and the mother. That's the ideal, that's the natural, that's the good way for it to happen. And then the other thing to realize is that IVF is extraordinarily painful for the wife, for the husband. The whole thing is so terribly artificial, with all the hormones that they give to the woman to hyperstimulate her ovaries so they can harvest many eggs, so they can conceive many embryos in the lab. There are actually women who have died of hyperovulation syndrome. So it's not very common at all, but it has happened, and it makes most women very sick, the amount of hormones that they give them to hyperstimulate those ovaries. But the husband, masturbates into a cup in the lab. I mean, it's all incredibly icky and ugly. And then the fact is that most IVF procedures are not successful. And the older the woman is, the less successful IVF is. So you have a situation where she might have a 25% chance of that embryo actually implanting. And then, even then, there are many more miscarriages in IVF pregnancies than in natural pregnancies, and many more stillbirths, and many more complications, and many more children who, have genetic anomalies, who have malformations and medical issues. So everything about IVF is worse than the natural pregnancy. And then finally, it's extremely expensive. So what ends up happening is people pay, between $15,000 and $30,000 for one cycle of IVF with a very low chance that it's going to succeed. And then if it doesn't happen, then they try another cycle, and again they're out of pocket a huge amount of money. And many people in the end have no child, and they've spent huge amounts of money. And what is the alternative? The restorative reproductive medicine doesn't bypass the person's infertility the way IVF does and make babies in a lab, but rather tries to resolve their infertility, tries to heal them, do a properly medical action, right? Heal them of their endometriosis or heal them of whatever condition it is that they're suffering from, so that they can then have a natural conception and have their children in a natural way. And it generally costs much, much less. The only area in which IVF has a slight edge over restorative reproductive medicine is that if it's successful, sometimes it's a little bit faster, because they can start right away because they're bypassing the person's infertility and make the babies in the lab. Whereas the restorative reproductive medicine sometimes takes a few months to actually heal the person. And then, they have to conceive naturally, so it can take a little bit more time. But under every other aspect, in terms of the morality of it, in terms of the cost, in terms of the success rates, restorative reproductive medicine, frequently people fail at IVF, and then out of despair, they turn to restorative reproductive medicine, and then they have a child. And they're like, why didn't I just start with restorative reproductive medicine, which was so much less painful, so much less expensive, and morally superior? It's baffling to me that 90% of couples who suffer from infertility and they do something about it go through IVF or artificial insemination rather than going to restorative reproductive medicine, which is such an amazingly beneficial thing.
Yes, yeah. So much of what you lay out right there, so important to be shared, especially in this time where not only are people not hearing this, but they're getting the opposite message. We had the Trump administration rollout of this IVF expansion last week. We covered it on Friday's show if anybody wants to see what that was all about. But basically, they're trying to label IVF as pro-life, which it certainly is not. It's part of a piece of the culture of death. Although, every child that is conceived, regardless of the circumstances of the conception, once that child exists, of course, that is a child to be loved at that point, regardless. So yes, to that's pro-life, loving the child that exists once they exist. But the unethical nature, the immorality that leads to that when you're creating life and killing most of that life, freezing many of these lives, and yes, conceiving in a laboratory, all of this. And yeah, you raised some very important points there. And one point I want to drill down on, and that is, RFK Jr., this MAHA movement, Make America Healthy Again, the whole truth behind that of what they were going for was always proposed to be dealing with the root cause, except when it comes to infertility. Here they're bypassing that. But that's what this restorative reproductive medicine does. It actually deals with the root cause. So again, folks can go and they can check out what you mentioned earlier, St. Paul the Sixth Institute, stpaulvi.com will lead you there. I think a lot of people know about Dr. Hilger's, although a lot more people need to know about that and NAPRO technology. What else is out there that we should be aware of?
Yeah, there's a growing body of wonderful centers all over the country that are offering restorative reproductive medicine. So there's My Catholic Doctor, which is great. That's telemedicine, and they can connect people with natural family planning or fertility awareness-based method instruction, and also with all the different providers that are out there for restorative reproductive medicine. There's a wonderful group called FACTS, F-A-C-T-S. Dr. Marguerite Duane does a great job in educating medical professionals about what's out there, which is a huge crying need. So because people who suffer from infertility go to their doctor, and their doctor doesn't know where to refer them except IVF. And so there needs to be a lot of medical education. And so FACTS is doing that, which is great. There's just a whole series of really wonderful organizations out there.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Dr. Joseph Meaney. He is a past president, senior fellow of the National Catholics Bioethics Center, ncbcenter.org. And just at the end of that last segment, we're talking about some resources. If somebody's struggling with infertility, if you know somebody struggling with infertility, to understand the options available, the ethical options available in terms of restorative reproductive medicine and what is out there. So making a little list here, we've got St. Paul the sixth.com, so stpaulvi.com, mycatholicdoctor.com. We've got facts about fertility.org, Dr. Marguerite Duane. Dr. Meaney, any others that you'd like to mention?
The International Institute for Restorative Reproductive Medicine is recently founded, and they're a little bit of a clearinghouse, particularly on articles and information about restorative medicine that are really great. So a lot of those things are out there, which is wonderful. There's some really great things happening on the policy level, right? From the Ethics and Public Policy Center in Washington, D.C. and the Heritage Foundation. We ended up contributing an article to a book that was co-sponsored by the EPPC and the Heritage Foundation and distributed to lawmakers, because that's the other thing too, is that not only are medical professionals not very well informed about restorative reproductive medicine and the general public, but also our lawmakers, our legislators, and even, our president. So it is important to do that political education, and that's being done right now, which is wonderful. But, obviously a lot more work needs to be done on all levels.
And Dr. Joseph Meaney is with us. All right, I want to ask you to comment on, I guess, what is something of a controversial topic in terms of we have many embryos, millions of human lives at an early stage of development that are frozen at this point as a result of IVF practices. Again, a child is now existing, and so what is our response but to love that child? But what does this mean when we have a child frozen? What is our response of love to this child? We did have Dr. Elizabeth Rex on not long ago talking about a big proponent and laying out the view in favor of embryo adoption in this case. What is your position on it? I know there's various ways to look at this. What are the distinctions, the important distinctions as you see them? Now, what can you share with us to help us make sense of it?
Yeah, I would say this is probably the most debated topic in Catholic bioethics currently. At the NCBC, we've published now 2 books on embryo adoption with major arguments for and against. The most important document from the Church giving teaching on this question is the instruction from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith from 2008, Dignitas Personae. And that instruction, when it brought up the idea of prenatal adoption, was very cautious, and it said, well, we're not really sure that there's a good solution here, and that prenatal adoption is the best solution or illicit solution. But it didn't say it wasn't possible either. So it was kind of like a question mark, and the church is still thinking about this question. So I think people, when they're discerning if they're called to do this, to adopt an embryo or to offer embryos for adoption, they're making that kind of discernment. There's some doctrinal information there in Dignitas Personae and instruction, but there are, the only things are basically negative, right? You cannot adopt an embryo as to resolve infertility. So it's not a cure for infertility, shouldn't be done for that. Children who are cryopreserved, it's a great injustice that has been done against them. And it seems, very, very bad just to leave them perpetually frozen, which some people propose that should happen. My personal inclination is to see that if a couple has, and they've repented obviously of having done IVF, but because they did IVF, they have a bunch of embryos that are in cold storage, that are cryopreserved in liquid nitrogen. If at all possible, I think they should try to rescue their own children. But sometimes, the couple has gone beyond reproductive age, and it's no longer possible for them to do that. They would not have a moral responsibility. One never has a moral responsibility to do something that's impossible. But I think that if it is possible for them to do it, that they should. My major concern with embryo adoption, certainly it's a very pro-life thing, and I think from a strictly pro-life perspective, it makes a lot of sense. But from the perspective of Catholic sacramental theology, the theology of marriage, I think there is a problem with the wife becoming pregnant without the husband. So, pregnant with a child that is not the husband's child, maybe not even her own child. There seems to be something about the marital covenant that one would only be pregnant through one's spouse. And that's really the difference between a prenatal adoption and a postnatal one. Because once the child is born, there's clearly nothing that goes against the theology of marriage to adopt that child. But before, becoming pregnant is not, just gestation. It's not just, a location. It's a very profound link between the woman and the child, who should be her child. But at the same time, I certainly see the pro-life arguments. I mean, what are we going to do? And in fact, even if prenatal adoption did happen, it does happen, right? There are a number of agencies that make it happen that are mostly run by evangelical Protestants. But the problem is, of course, that there are millions of frozen embryos out there, and millions, are not going to be adopted. So I don't think it's going to be a practical solution just on the very, very practical level. We need to stop producing so many children and freezing them. That is the bottom line. And that is certainly what St. John Paul II called for internationally. Says, made a huge appeal, says, please stop doing this. And many countries around the world are putting in these ethical limitations on IVF. So places like Italy and Germany do not allow the freezing of embryos. They do not allow the production of more embryos than can be implanted in the labs. And, something you were saying earlier about how anti-life IVF is, I mean, one of the integral ways that IVF is practiced is that if they transfer multiple embryos and they all implant, then what they typically do is what they call a fetal reduction, which is a selective abortion of the weaker children. And most of the time what they're doing is they're reducing twins to singletons, to single pregnancies, which is really terrible. It's associating direct abortion with IVF, and this happens not infrequently, which is very, very sad.
Many good and fair points there. Dr. Joseph Meaney is with us. You mentioned one thing in the beginning there. You said you wouldn't be able to adopt an embryo, a child at this early stage of development, as a sort of response to infertility. Speak to us about why that is, because there's something of a basic logic that would just say, okay, you have all these people who are experiencing infertility. You have all of these embryos that are frozen that could use rescuing. Why can't you match those things up? What is the problem with doing that?
Yeah, from a Catholic perspective, the dignity of the human person is such that you can never instrumentalize another person. So the way St. John Paul II mentioned it is people have to be ends and not means. We never can use people for another purpose, but we have to see people as ends. And so if one is adopting a child as a means of overcoming the pain of infertility, you're basically instrumentalizing that child, which is not something that we should be doing. So what could be legitimate is to adopt a child because you want to rescue them, and your intention is really to help that child to be born and to come to full life, which is wonderful. But that is using the person as an end rather than using them as a way to overcome your infertility. And actually, a lot of children who are born through IVF suffer psychologically from the fact that they were basically treated as objects and manipulated, and all the different things that happen in IVF as a way to treat their parents' pain of infertility rather than wanted for their own sake.
Yes, yeah, not things to be used, but people to be loved. What a blessing. Dr. Joseph Meaney, thank you so much. God bless you all.